The terms Yajuj and Majuj, or Gog and Magog, appear in religious texts, including the Bible and the Quran. According to the Bible, Gog and Magog are symbolic of nations or peoples who rise against God and his people in apocalyptic scenarios. Here's a brief explanation based on the Bible. Before we start, we'd like to ask for your support. If you enjoy our video, please hit the like button. This will help us reach more people and create content for you. Now let's get started with today's video. Yajuj and Majuj, Gog and Magog, according to the Bible. The figures of Gog and Magog, referred to as Yajuj and Majuj in Islamic tradition, are pivotal symbols in biblical eschatology. Their presence in the Bible, primarily in the Old Testament book of Ezekiel and the New Testament book of Revelation, has fueled theological discussions and interpretations for centuries. These figures represent forces of chaos and rebellion against God, playing a central role in the unfolding of the end times narrative. This document provides an in-depth examination of their origins, significance, and role according to biblical scripture. Origins and biblical references. Ezekiel 38-39, Gog and Magog in prophecy. In the Old Testament, the primary reference to Gog and Magog is found in the prophetic writings of Ezekiel. The identity of Gog and Magog. Gog is introduced as the leader or prince from the land of Magog. Ezekiel 38 verse 2 says, "Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him." Magog is identified as a region or people associated with the northern parts of the ancient world, often linked to barbarian tribes or nations hostile to Israel. The coalition of nations. Gog is described as leading a coalition of nations, including Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, and Beth Togarmah, in an attack against Israel. These nations represent a broad alliance of enemies from different parts of the known world. The purpose of the attack. The attack is depicted as part of God's divine plan. Ezekiel 38 verse 16 states, "You will come up against my people Israel like a cloud covering the land. In the latter days, I will bring you against my land, that the nations may know me, when through you, O Gog, I vindicate my holiness before their eyes." The battle is not merely a political or military conflict but a spiritual confrontation where God's sovereignty and holiness are displayed. God's intervention. God defeats Gog and his forces through supernatural means, including earthquakes, pestilence, and fire. Ezekiel 38 verses 19-23. The destruction serves as a demonstration of God's power and glory. Ezekiel 39 details the aftermath, including the burial of Gog's forces in the valley of Hamon-Gog and the cleansing of the land for 7 months. Revelation 20 verses 7-10. Gog and Magog in the final judgment. In the New Testament, Gog and Magog reappear in the apocalyptic vision of John in the book of Revelation. Context of Revelation 20. The passage occurs after the millennial reign of Christ. Satan, who had been bound during this period, is released to deceive the nations. Gog and Magog as symbolic entities. Unlike Ezekiel's account, where Gog and Magog are specific nations, Revelation portrays them as representatives of the world's rebellious forces. Revelation 20 verse 8 states, "He will go out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea." The final battle. Gog and Magog lead a massive army to surround the camp of the saints and the beloved city. Revelation 20 verse 9. This city is often interpreted as the New Jerusalem or God's people. Fire from heaven consumes the attacking forces, and Satan is thrown into the lake of fire, marking the ultimate defeat of evil. Symbolism and interpretation. Historical context. Gog and Magog in ancient Near Eastern thought. Magog is mentioned in the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 verse 2 as a descendant of Japheth, often associated with far northern regions. The name may have evoked images of distant, unknown lands populated by hostile tribes. Gog does not appear in earlier texts outside Ezekiel, leading some scholars to consider it a symbolic or literary figure rather than a specific historical individual. Historical enemies of Israel. The coalition described in Ezekiel may symbolize historical enemies of Israel, such as Assyria or Babylon, but the scale and eschatological context suggest a more universal interpretation of opposition to God's people. Theological and eschatological themes. God's sovereignty. The accounts of Gog and Magog emphasize God's control over history and his ability to use even rebellious nations to fulfill his purposes. The universality of rebellion. Gog and Magog represent the universal nature of rebellion against God. Their reappearance in Revelation highlights that sin and opposition to God persist across history and must be decisively defeated. Divine judgment. The destruction of Gog and Magog underscores the inevitability of divine judgment against evil. Both Ezekiel and Revelation portray God as a righteous judge who acts to vindicate his holiness. Hope for God's people. The defeat of Gog and Magog offers assurance to God's people that he will ultimately protect and vindicate them. The visions serve as a source of hope and encouragement in the face of persecution and opposition. Symbolic versus literal interpretations. Literal interpretation. Some theologians and eschatologists interpret Gog and Magog as literal nations or alliances that will rise against Israel or God's people in the future. Speculation about their modern identity has ranged from specific countries to broader coalitions, though these interpretations often reflect contemporary geopolitical concerns. Symbolic interpretation. Others view Gog and Magog as symbolic representations of all forces opposed to God, transcending specific historical or geographical identities. This interpretation aligns with Revelation's use of apocalyptic imagery and its emphasis on universal themes. Parallels in other religious traditions. The biblical narrative of Gog and Magog finds echoes in other religious and cultural traditions. Islamic tradition. In the Quran, Yajuj and Majuj are described as corrupt and destructive peoples who are restrained behind a barrier built by Dhul-Qarnayn. Surah Al-Kahf 18:94-99. Their release near the Day of Judgment signals a period of chaos and divine intervention. Jewish apocalyptic literature. Gog and Magog appear in post-biblical Jewish texts, such as the Book of Jubilees and later rabbinic writings, often as part of eschatological scenarios involving the Messiah and the final judgment. Cultural myths. The figures of Gog and Magog have been incorporated into various legends and folklore, including medieval Christian and Islamic traditions, where they symbolize distant, barbaric peoples or cosmic forces of chaos. Conclusion. Gog and Magog occupy a significant place in biblical prophecy as archetypes of rebellion against God. From Ezekiel's vision of a climactic battle in the latter days to their symbolic role in the apocalyptic narrative of Revelation, they encapsulate themes of divine sovereignty, judgment, and ultimate victory over evil. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, their story serves as a profound reminder of God's power, justice, and the hope of redemption for his people. Please subscribe my YouTube channel. I hope you like this video. Thank you.